Hello everyone, Alex Scratch fans coming at you guys on a video. And today I just wanted to give my thoughts and opinions on a character from Ultraman Rube or R/P, and that is Makoto Aizen. Now, a lot of people have been wondering where have I been on Ultraman R/P, and to be honest, I haven't really been catching up on it. And the thing is that later on in life, you just don't have a lot of time, especially with being in college. There's honestly not a lot of time I could fit on my hands to make discussion videos about Godzilla, Gamera, Ultraman, Super Sentai, or Kamen Rider. And the thing is that I'm pretty sure that a lot of people could probably relate to people like Ultraman Explained or Goju Fan 93, where they just have so much going on in their personal life, but they just don't have time to get to insignificant things such as making a video and editing it and spending hours producing content on a weekly basis. And that is honestly at the stage that I am, and unfortunately, it's just what it is. But I did want to make a short discussion video in regards to Makoto Aizen, who I can't say is, but was the primary antagonist of Ultraman Rube. Now, when I watched Ultraman Rube, I just thought it was a pretty generic, by-the-book, comedic Ultraman series. And a lot of people were experiencing that too. People said they really liked the first episode because of the comedy in it. You know, the scene where Ultraman, Rosso, and Blue are standing up to Grigio Bone, and he's just standing there, then he attacks them, and it's scary and hilarious. But to be honest, when I watched that, I just felt overall taken out of the spectacle of it. Whenever I watch the first episode of an Ultraman series, I feel like it's supposed to grant me with the spectacle of the true abilities and mastery of not only the effects of Ultraman, but also the abilities and the overall stunt coordination of the Ultraman saga and franchise. But when I watch Ultraman Rube, it just felt very standard and generic and comedic. Now, I was still planning to give the series hope. You know, I walked into Ultraman Orb not sure if it was going to be better than Ultraman X. I walked into Ultraman Gi not realizing if it was actually going to be a light-hearted, story-driven narrative. However, when it came down to Rube, there was one aspect that I felt like gave the series a great aspect of determination and hope for the future, and that was the primary antagonist, Makoto Aizen. When I looked at Makoto Aizen, I felt like he was going to be one of the greatest Ultraman villains. And I feel like what they did with Makoto Aizen was honestly a little bit odd in terms of decision making. Now, don't get me wrong, Ultraman, the franchise, has always been a story-driven show for kids. In fact, it probably doesn't really have much of a grand narrative, but it does have, in fact, it has a motif, and that is to teach children lessons for the future and for growing up. In fact, many of the attributes that we see reflected within the Ultraman characters can be displayed within human qualities on an everyday basis, such as kindness, courage, respect, and bravery. But when we look at the villains, they display things such as greed, desire, and lust, and those kinds of attributes can be attributed to the negative people that we see within life. Well, even though most of the villains in Ultraman aren't necessarily human, when it comes to Makoto Aizen, I personally would have made him a human character. Now, you're probably going to see the reason why once I'm done explaining. Now, back when I was watching Ultraman Rube, this is how I interpreted Makoto Aizen. I personally interpreted Makoto Aizen to be a madman, but not necessarily a madman in the sense that he is completely and utterly insane, but a madman in the fact that he reflects attributes of human desire. When I look at Makoto Aizen, let's take a look back at his backstory. Let's just backtrack a bit on the character. When I look at Makoto Aizen, I see that he was originally a young boy who was working hard in his father's company. His father owned one of the largest tech industries. Well, at the time, it was actually a very small business within Japan. Makoto Aizen hadn't made it to the stellar entrepreneur that he is today. So when I look at Makoto Aizen, he's coming from a very low background. He's just a typical low-class worker. But as a low-class laborer, he is able to rise up through the ranks and formulate his father's business into a global enterprise. And I feel like Makoto Aizen, in that regard, reflects the story of a hero. And that is honestly what ties into the greater motif of his character. Because as a character, he reflects the attributes of a hero. He's positive, he's optimistic, he's successful, but at the same time, he desires more in life. And therefore he reflects the lust and desire of a villain. So I feel like that also ties into the literal sense. Metaphorically, in my mind, Makoto Aizen has the origins of a hero. We have always seen the story of an underdog, but have we ever seen the villain be the underdog in their life? Sure, we have seen that before within comic books and superhero movies, but to have seen that done in Ultraman would have been very interesting. When I look to Ultraman Geed's previous villain, the last villain, I believe, is, I'm already forgetting his name, but Kai or K, who was Belial's alien storm host, he was already successful. He was a very famous author, therefore he had lots of money and wealth. Jugless Juggler always dressed up in a suit and was generally a very classy villain. A lot of the Ultraman villains seem to stem from upper class rankings. If you look at Jugless Juggler, a very famous character with an Ultraman orb. If you look at Ultraman Geed's villain, Belial or Alien Storm, a very famous author that is beloved by everyone. When you look at Evil Tika's human host, a beloved scientist that is world-renowned for his intelligence, generally, the villains within Ultraman have always been of upper class, but the heroes in Ultraman, especially in the newer generations, have been regarded as lower class. When you look at Hikaru from Ultraman Ginga, he is simply a homeless person. He walks around, going around his old school and talking to his old friends, but he doesn't have a job, he doesn't work, he doesn't sustain a living wage. When you look at Ultraman Orb's character, Guy, the character who is beloved by everyone, he is the literal definition of a homeless person. In the very first introduction of him, he comes out of an ice truck, and he generally wears the same outfit all the time. And the only reason why he is able to have these living accommodations is because of Naomi and the Something Search people allowing to give him hospitality. And through that, he is able to experience some luxuries, such as going to the hot tub. When you look at Ultraman Geed, Riku, he's out of a job after Skull Gamora destroys his shop. The only place he has to live is the underground base that's provided to him. So, all of the characters in Ultraman, in my mind, provide the metaphorical battle between the lower class and the upper class. When you look at all the villains in Ultraman, they typically wear suits. They're prestiged individuals. When you look at the heroes, they just wear campy outfits, generic clothes, nothing really too special. So when I look at Makoto Aizen, going back to him, I feel like he would have had a grand narrative, because he would have come from that lower class position, just as so many of the other Ultraman heroes have. But it is because of, unlike the Ultraman heroes, he worked in real life that allowed him to become successful, to get to that upper class position that would allow him to become a villain. This is just how I interpreted the Ultraman franchise overall, because a lot of the characters probably don't even realize this in terms of their success. Even some of the older villains had the same way too. When you look at Bolton 2, when he possessed a human, that was Dr. Goto, a world-renowned scientist and one of the first Japanese astronauts. A very prestigious individual that Bolton possessed. When you look to, what's the other character? When you look to Alien Chibble, a popular toy salesman. Overall, the Ultraman villains have always been prestige, successful, popular individuals. And the reason why they're villains is because they use this popularity to shift the public interest in their favor, which allows them to shift global interest. And Makoto Aizen is the literal definition of this. By him shifting public interest within Japan, he's able to use his global influence to shift the global sphere into his favor, which will allow him to take over the world. This is why I felt like Makoto Aizen was probably one of the greatest Ultraman villains, until Tsuburaya Production honestly ruined him, in my opinion. When I look at Makoto Aizen, I can see many of the reflective character traits that typical humans have. When I look at humans in real life, they like to live life like it's a thrill. Many people go on roller coasters. They like to jump out of airplanes. They like to do things that are thrilling, intense, and sometimes even dangerous. Makoto Aizen, in my opinion, reflects that certain attribute of adrenaline rush thrills that humans have. When I look at Makoto Aizen, he is very successful. He is rich. He has access to any sort of technology. He can fly in a jetpack to work every single day, and it would just be like taking a taxi or driving a car to work. But Makoto Aizen doesn't want to live that rich, happy, positive life. He wants more, and it's that greed that makes him a villain. And because of this, I felt like Makoto Aizen was very what's the words? Relatable to everyday people. We all live in positive life for the most part. We all have things at our access. For example, a lot of us have cameras, computers, Ultraman figures, but it's that desire, that lust, that makes us want more, that I felt like Makoto Aizen clearly reflected as an individual. Makoto Aizen could simply live life as a rich, global entrepreneur, but instead he wants the power of Ultraman, which drives him to the point of destruction and madness, to the point where he is able to destroy entire city blocks simply for his own pleasure and self-gain. When I look at Ultraman Rube, I see that Makoto Aizen, when he's later reviewed as Syriza, wanted to gain the power of Ultraman, and he wanted that power so badly. It's almost like the mythical story of trying to take fire from the sun. I'm trying to remember what story it was. I don't remember. I think it was Icarus, where Icarus is trying to take the fire of the sun, and he flies too close to the sun and he ends up dying. I felt like Makoto Aizen was the literal representation of that, where he wants the power, he can have access to it. And I also feel like Makoto Aizen can relate to the characters in Ultraman Geed. The characters in, Ultraman Rube. The characters in Ultraman Rube come from this pretty poor making clothes store. Every time they release a shirt, they're always scared if it's going to trend, because they're probably close to the point of closing down the business. So when I look at Makoto Aizen, I can relate to the very same position that he had come from, as just a low-class worker, just like the main characters. But it is because of him wanting more, his greed and desire, that he has managed to rise up to the position that he is in today. However, it is because of his continued persistence that turns him into the villain and not the hero of the story. And Makoto Aizen displays the traits of jealousy. It's almost like the biblical story of Cain and Abel. Abel is the brother in the Bible that is loved by Adam and Eve and God. He is given the power to harvest and to farm the crops of the land, similar to how the characters in Ultraman Rube are given the powers of Ultraman by the Ultraman characters. And Cain, similar to Makoto Aizen, becomes jealous of their companion, the Ultraman brothers, Rosso and Blue. But it is because of their continued desire and persistence for that praise that ultimately turns Cain into the villain of the biblical story, to the point that he kills his brother Abel. The same thing can be reflected within Makoto Aizen and Rosso and Blue. Makoto Aizen is a character that feels self-entitled. He feels like he deserves everything in life. Everything had already been handed to him. He has the business, he has the technology, and he's the entrepreneur of a global industry. But he still wants more because he's a self-entitled character. He feels that he deserves the power of Ultraman, not that it can just be granted to anyone. And that's what ultimately allows him to discover the power of Ultraman Orb, Dark, Nor, Schwartz, whatever terms you use. So overall, I feel like Makoto Aizen could have been the best Ultraman villain that had ever come out. When I look to what I asked some people on Discord about this, Kaiji Kobe honestly felt like it was one of the best aspects of the show. And I'm going to mention Kaiji Kobe because he's a really good friend of mine on the Ultraman Discord. So everyone, make sure to go subscribe to Kaiji Kobe. I'll have a link to his channel in the description below. And also make sure to go join the Ultraman Discord chat if you want to talk to me and any other cool Ultraman fans like Kaiji Kobe. Now real quick, I wanted to mention that when it comes down to Ultraman Rube, this is what happened to Makoto Aizen. It turned out he was just a shell of a body that was being taken over by Syriza, an alien life form. And then once Syriza left Makoto Aizen, then we got a replacement female who was in fact the sister of Rosso and Blue. Now, I'm not saying this because I don't like female villains. In fact, I've always wanted a female villain. One of my favorite Ultra villains overall was Camilla because I felt like it asserted feminine power. I'm not trying to sound like a liberal here, guys. I'm honestly not some major liberal that promotes any of that stuff. But what I'm just trying to say is that having a female aspect in Ultraman was always very intriguing to me. When we look at the female Ultras, Ultra Woman Beth, Mother of Ultra, Ultra Yulian, they were always just minor characters who either appeared in a couple of episodes, always had supporting roles. But there's never been an Ultraman series where the female has either been the primary antagonist or the protagonist. And I felt like by including Rosso and Blue's sister in the show was very interesting, but we already had such a titular villain in the form of Makoto Aizen. They could have done so much with Makoto Aizen. I felt like Makoto Aizen would have honestly been the best Ultraman villain. And hopefully you can tell why, just by this long explanation that I gave about him. Makoto Aizen represents the thrill in our life, but he takes that thrill and uses it for self-gain, pleasure, and destruction. And when I look at Makoto Aizen, I feel like I could see myself in him. Because in life, I want to be successful. I want to come from nowhere and be somebody in life. But the problem is, when you get to that position, are you just going to let it stay? Or are you going to want more? Are you going to jeopardize that just for something that you're not even sure is even certain? And that's what Makoto Aizen does. He's jeopardizing everything within his company, everything that he has been successful for, all these years of hard work, just for the power of Ultraman that isn't even guaranteed for him, but is possible for him. And that's why I feel like Makoto Aizen represents the risk-taking aspects, the endeavors of us. But he uses that for destruction and evil purposes. In contrast, the main characters, who get the power out of nowhere, don't feel self-entitled about it, and simply use that power to not hurt or to gain self-desire out of it, but to simply help the community around them, such as the baseball players, their fellow students, and other aspects, or even their older friends. And that's where I feel like Ultraman Rube overall had a great narrative. That's where I felt like the series was really picking up on the villain. The villain was my favorite aspect of Ultraman Rube, and Kai Jacoby even agrees with this, and now he's just a low-tier character that we don't even know is even going to return ever. Which I feel like if he doesn't return, it's honestly going to be a huge disappointment. Anyway, thank you all for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Would you have liked to see Makoto Aizen be a human and have all of these defining philosophical traits to him that add much more depth to him? Or do you just like the casual, funny character? I mean, I personally feel like Makoto Aizen was great, because he was a very mock character. And by that aspect, I meant that he really mocked the heroes. He gave the heroes their own grade exam to say that they're poorly performing as an Ultraman, each respectively Rosso and Blue. And he also mocked them in their fights. Makoto Aizen? Get it? Because he mocked them, Makoto? Okay. That was pretty bad. But in the fights, he would always mock Rosso and Blue. You'd make fun of them and say that they're incompetent and inadequate fighters. And I really like Makoto Aizen for that, because a lot of the other Dark Ultras, they just have condescending dialogue, but they never get to the nitty-gritty humiliation that Aizen was able to do. When I looked at all the other previous Dark Ultra fights, they either just are evenly matched and either beat them or lose to them, or you have some aspects like Belial, where Belial gives this long dialogue about how he's going to destroy the universe and conquer millions. Sure, that's pretty cool and all, but it gets a little bit generic after the 6th time you've heard that same dialogue of Belial trying to take over the world or the universe and destroy everything. But then you have Makoto Aizen as Ultraman Orb Dark, and he's just so condescending. He is just so infuriating to watch, because he is able to just pick up the heroes, and he's able to have fun with them. And that's what I love. That's honestly, I've always wanted to see an Ultraman character kind of like a Marvel character, like kind of like Deadpool or Spider-Man. But instead it's the villain, and that's where I feel like it's so great, because when I look at Spider-Man, Ultraman Orb Dark honestly reminds me of a character like Deadpool or Spider-Man, where they're able to be in a very perilous situation and have fun with them. They're in peril, they're in danger, but they're able to make jokes about it, they're able to be quirky about it. But instead, that's the villain, and that's what feels so infuriating. When we see that with the hero, we just say, oh, that's their confidence, you know, that's the hero feeling heroic and courageous in these times of danger. But when that's the villain, you feel like the heroes are just nothing, that they're just ants, like they're dust. And when the dust builds up, even dust can be dangerous, as he said. So I felt like Makoto Aizen was honestly he honestly had the potential to be the greatest Ultraman villain ever. And then Tsuburaya, for the sake of just making a kids show, decided to just throw all that out the window. But anyway, what are you guys' thoughts on Makoto Aizen? Do you like him? Do you hate him? Are you glad he's gone? Or would you like to see him return? Thank you all for watching. If you guys enjoyed this video, like, comment, share, subscribe, and I'll be seeing you guys in the next video. Bye.